In this fifth and final video of Chapter 3, we will look at language development. Oh, okay. Let me get back. Oh, here we are. Language development. Okay, we're going to look at defining language, language's rule systems, how language develops, biological and environmental influences, and an interactionist viewpoint. There's a few little parts I might be skipping along the way that you can read about on your own. So let's begin with defining language. Language is a form of communication. It can be spoken, written, or signed. It's based on a system of symbols, letters in the case of English. It lets us pass down information. We use language obviously to teach others and to pass information to others, and we use language in books for long-term storage of information. Language consists of the words used by community and the rules for varying and combining them. Obviously, we call these rules syntax. And any language, any true language, has to have infinite generativity, meaning that it allows for the ability to produce an endless number of meaningful sentences using a finite set of words and rules. I mean, we have a certain number of words you have a certain number of words in any language. Sure, new words get added and whatnot, but you can't just make up any old word and say it's in the language. Like if I just say to you, I had a great zot earlier today. I mean, like you're not going to understand me. I can't just make up a term. So we always have like a certain number of acceptable words. We have a certain number of rules. Most of us couldn't really write down the rules of syntax and grammar in our language, but we understand them, and we know how to produce correct sentences. We can recognize when a sentence is incorrect. If I say Sally Bob hit, it's an incorrect sentence. It would be okay to say Sally hit Bob or Bob hit Sally, but I can't say Sally Bob hit. And so we have a certain number of rules. And so based on having a certain number of words and a certain number of rules, there isn't actually an infinite number of sentences. Like, for instance, there's no such thing as what's the longest sentence you can produce, because if you try to come up with the longest sentence, I could easily add one more word to it. I mean, maybe part of the sentence is like, she was very tired, and then, continues. I could say she was very, very tired. I mean, like, there's no limit. And so every language allows for, once again, an infinite number of possibilities. Let's look at some parts of language. Oh, wait, how did I get here? Oh, yeah. I kind of skipped ahead at some point or something. Okay, so let's look at, we're going to look at some parts of languages. First of all, we're going to look at the development of language sounds, I guess, is what we're looking at. Anyways, but I did want to mention what phonemes are, because we need to know what that is, first of all. A phoneme is a basic sound unit of a language. Okay? So it's all the sound, for English, we have something like, you don't need this number, but I think it's 42 phonemes. It might be in your book. I don't have it written down in front of me, but we have more phonemes than letters, because some of the letters make more than one sound. Plus, you can combine letters to make up a new sound. So, like the CH sound is a phoneme, ch. It makes the ch sound, and so phonemes are things like b and t and a and a, and okay, so each of the individual sounds. The reason I want to introduce phonemes is newborns, and during the first 6 years, during the first 6 months of life, newborns have been known as citizens of the world because they can hear the distinct phonemes from any language in the world. Like they can hear them. They can hear the distinction. So we, you may say, well, that's why is that so incredible? I mean, we cannot do it as adults. I mean, our brains are specialized. If you grew up, because you've grown up with a certain language, my brain is specialized for English because that's the language I learned from birth and grew up with, and so if there's somebody speaking a language from India, for instance, I mean, they have certain sounds, like they have two T sounds that English speakers can't really tell apart, and they have two D sounds in their language that English speakers can't tell apart. But these babies, in the first six months of life, would recognize the difference between the sounds. So and this makes sense because when you're born, I mean, you're born able to learn any language. So you would have to be able to distinguish the sounds of any language. If I had if I helped produce a child here and then it was all adopted by some Russian speaking couple, then the baby's going to learn Russian. Doesn't matter if they're genetics who came from two English speakers. I mean, a baby's going to learn whatever language they're exposed to. So this is why they're called citizens of the world. They could possibly learn any language, and they can understand the sounds of any language and hear the distinctions. Okay, but that does disappear. So I said in the first 6 months they can do that. In the second 6 months of the first year, from 6 to 12 months, their brain starts to specialize to distinguish and recognize the phonemes in their native language, the language that they're being exposed to. And so they will start to lose the ability to hear sounds that are not in their language. So our brains get really, really good at hearing our own language. And this is really important because when I make a b sound or I make a t sound, it's different than your b or t sound, and yet we understand and we can recognize each other. So we learn to categorize sounds, even though people have different accents and whatnot. It's also somebody speaking English, even if they're using an accent and they say things a little bit differently, your brain gets really, really good at recognizing what sounds people are saying, even though there's a wide variety of ways that people produce those sounds. Okay. They also, during the second 6 months of life, they start to segment the speech stream into words. So they start to, when they're hearing language spoken to them, they're starting to split them up into words. And you may also wonder, is that a hard thing? Yes, it's very hard. I mean, have you ever listened to somebody speak another language where you have like no clue of how to speak that language? Doesn't it sometimes sound like they're like they have no spaces in their talking? Like it sounds like they're talking really fast. It's like, well, I mean, like, and you're thinking, wow, like take a breath, like it's all like it's just a stream of sound. Well, you know what? That's what my speech is like right now. If you didn't know English, that's what you'd be hearing, because we have no pauses in between words when we speak. Your brain does that. It hears each of my words individually, like it segments them, but there's actually, we don't pause in between words as we speak verbally. We're just as likely to have a pause in the middle of a word as in between words. So you can't use that as a clue. So it is amazing that they learn how to chop apart this ongoing speech stream into words. And I'm not getting into how they do that, but it's like it's using just advanced like statistical techniques in the background of that your brain's able to compute to see like which sounds like tend to go together and things like that. So it's an automatic process, but it's an amazing development. Okay, let me go on. Let's look at the sequence now of sounds that an infant makes. And the first is crying, and this is available right from birth. So a brand spanking newborn, can cry as soon as they come out of the womb, and that is their first communication sound. I mean, they will cry to signal various states that they're in. If they're hungry or afraid or in pain, the baby will cry. Cooing is next. It begins, around 2 to 4 months, and the baby will start making soft vowel sounds like ooh, ah. Okay, anyways, those are coos. It's all vowel sounds. Babbling begins around 6 months. Babbling now combines a consonant and a vowel. So it might be like la, la, ba, da, da. Yeah, and they initially start individually, one babble at a time, and then they start doing what's called repetitive babbling. I don't actually have an age for that, but it's, babbling starts around 6 months. It's a little bit later that they'll start repetitive babbling where they string them together. Ma 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 ba 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 ba. And then towards the end of the first year, the babbling will change again and becomes expressive babbling, where now they don't just repeat the same sound, but they mix them up. And so a baby might be like, ba da boo ba, ba ba be di 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 ba ba, so that's called expressive babbling. So they mix in different sounds together. It sounds like they're really like they'll have intonations. They'll sound, and they'll have the certain parts will be like stressed. I mean, it sounds like they're having a conversation, and they're kind of copying the speech they've heard around them. Ah, ba ba ba. Like some things will sound like questions. And anyways, that's expressive. That usually means that they're getting ready to talk. Another thing that means that a baby's getting ready to talk is when you see the gestures show up. This is in the 8 to 12 month range, and so it mentions here showing and pointing, because these are communicative actions. So if a baby is pointing towards something, it means that they want it. They'll point towards a toy, perhaps, or showing something. They'll hold something up. Like if the baby holds up the empty bottle, they're basically saying I'm done, or they might be saying I want more. But they're trying to communicate. So these gestures have purpose. It is the baby attempting to communicate their wishes, and it usually, that along with the expressive babbling, usually means that they're getting ready to speak. First words on average come at around 13 months of age, so just past the 1 year mark. The typical range is between 10 to 15 months. You will find children outside of that typical range as well. There's a lot of variety, but the majority of babies will start speaking between 10 to 15 months. Okay. Many infants understand their own name as is often the first word that they understand, and that's typically around 5 months of age. When right around the time they're producing their first word at 13 months of age, they have what's called a receptive vocabulary, of which is which words they can understand, of about 50 words. So research has shown that around 13 months of age, a baby can understand about 50 words that they're hearing. And this is right around the time they're they're getting ready to produce their first word. So the receptive vocabulary is always ahead of the spoken vocabulary. They always understand more words than they can produce. Their spoken vocabulary gets up to 50 words sometime around 18 months, a year and a half. So at 13 months, they were doing their first word. 5 months later, at 18 months, they're producing about 50 words. So because a baby can understand 50 words at 13 months, and then they can produce 50 words at 18 months. It's been hypothesized that maybe it takes about 5 months in between when they can understand a word before they learn how to say it themselves. And so we don't know that for sure, but and then they have a vocabulary spurt. Typically between a year and a half and 2 years, so in between 18 months and 24 months, they will all of a sudden increase their vocabulary rapidly. So I just told you that an 18-month-old can speak about 50 words. A 24-month-old, so at the age of 2, they can speak about 200 words. So it's gone in a half year, it goes from like 50 words up to about 200 word vocabulary. And it often happens like very rapidly, which is why they call it a spurt. It's not like gradual, like and slow and steady. It's kind of like all of a sudden, like in 1 month, it'll seem like this baby is talking way more than they used to, or this toddler. Okay, let's go on. This was some of the numbers I just talked about came from this study. This was just a study with 14 children that they were studying intensely as far as which words they knew and which words they could produce. And so on the left, we see when we see the range for when these 14 children produce their first word. And you can see it goes from about 10 up to about 17 months of age. And the average was 13 months. The vocabulary spurt was also measured for these 14 children. The average was at 19 months, was the average time for the vocabulary spurt. But, you know, the earliest child did it at 13 months of age. So that was like an early vocabulary spurt. One of them was kind of late at 25 months of age. So that, you know, once again, there can be a wide range. In that case, like between 13 and 25 months, that's a whole year difference of when different children in the study had their spurt. Okay, some more. I'm skipping the top section of this slide here. I do want you to read about overextension and underextension. They're pretty simple concepts. Concepts you can read and understand them on your own. Two-word utterances is next. So in the same time period where they're going to have the vocabulary spurt, a year and a half to 2 years, they're also going to start moving on from producing just one word at a time. So at 13 months, remember, the average child says their first word. For a while, they will only say one word at a time. And then typically somewhere around a year and a half or maybe a little later, they'll start saying 2 words at a time. And we call this telegraphic speech. The 2 words will be sensible, and they'll connect together in the right order to produce like a thought, you know, to display what they're thinking. But they leave out all short words. So, you know, toddlers aren't saying the or of or to, or, you know, like they're using the most important words. So telegraphic speech will include things like, you know, fall down, you know, or give bottle, or and eventually the 2 words will become 3 words. So they might want to say, "Mommy, give cookie," or "want ice cream," you know. But it's telegraphic speech. Once again, they're saying the most important words that would be in the sentence if they knew how to produce a sentence. You know, "Mommy, I would like some ice cream." I mean, they just say "want ice cream." Okay. Anyways, so it's called telegraphic speech because people used to send messages like that when they used telegrams, and because you had to pay for each word, so you wanted to save money. You wouldn't say, "Meet me at the train station at 5 o'clock." You would say, "Meet train station 5," you know, or something like that, and you would leave out all the other smaller detailed words. Okay, anyways, this, you can see the milestones listed here. So I went over a lot of most of these with you. So next we're going to look at biological and environmental influences of, of speech. And we'll start with biological influences. And we have two regions of the brain that are involved in language, specifically involved in language, Broca's area and Wernicke's area. They're both typically in the left hemisphere. And let me go to the next slide here. Broca's area is in the left frontal lobe. It's involved in speech production. And just to help you remember, I always remember that it's the one closer to the front, and producing is like, you're saying words out of the front of your face. And so I don't know, they always, because I used to forget which one's for production and which one's for comprehension. But if we go back, Wernicke's area, I now always think, oh yeah, that one's closer to my ear, so that's for understanding speech. The one Broca's area is closer to the front of my brain, so that's for producing speech. It's like coming out of my mouth. Okay, anyways, so yeah, those are the purposes. Broca's helps you produce speech. Wernicke's helps you understand, comprehend speech. They do other things too. They're actually more complicated than that, but that's the basic thrust. Broca's helps you produce. Wernicke's helps you comprehend. To continue with biological influences, there was a theory proposed by Noam Chomsky. He was a linguist. Noam is how you spell his first name. Chomsky, Chomsky, a very famous linguist. He proposed that humans are biologically pre-wired, in order to learn language at a certain time in development and in a certain way. So he was saying that we're born ready to learn language. And he said that our brains contain a language acquisition device. So it is kind of like it's a part of your brain that's going to learn language, and that's going to help you learn whatever language you're exposed to. It's not an actual physical structure. It's not like, when we looked here, we can point out Broca's and Wernicke's area. There's no area of the brain that we've labeled language acquisition device. It's kind of a theoretical concept that just kind of not saying that it's necessarily one spot, but it's just that your brain is going to work at learning language. It's already like pre-programmed to learn language. Okay. Anyway, so pre-wired was the term that he used. That we're born that way. So that's kind of like biological ideas, that it's in the brain. You learn language because your brain is ready to learn language, and you have specialized areas. There's also environmental influences. There was original theories by behaviorists that said we learned language environmentally, based on the stimuli that we're exposed to. But that theory didn't hold up very well. But we certainly do know that the environment affects language learning. And we know this, for instance, because early speech input and poverty has been shown in studies to have effects on children's language skills. Children growing up in poverty have reduced language skills. Children that are exposed to less speech input have reduced language skills. So it matters. It does matter what the environment is providing for you. So studies have shown that vocabulary development is linked to families' socioeconomic status and type of talk that the parents direct towards their children. So let me give you kind of some of the main results that looked at that. They did a study where they compared welfare parents, parents that were on welfare, versus professional parents. So professional parents are like, parents that are doctors or lawyers or professors or something. anyways, when they in the study, they found that the welfare parents talked much less to their young children compared to the professional parents. They also talked less about past events, and they provided less elaborations in their speech to their children. So overall, they talked less, they did less elaborations, they less about past events. And so when they studied their children at 3 years of age, they found that children of the professional parents had much larger vocabularies at 3 years. So this just showed that the speech input mattered. If you talk to your child less than the first 3 years of life, their vocabularies will be stunted, compared to if you talk to them a lot. And when we do talk to children, we often use what's called child-directed speech. Another name for this, more common term is baby talk. So we our language, we use language in a higher pitch than normal. We use simple words and sentences. We repeat certain words over again. We have more pauses in our speech. And we use slower speech. I used to think baby talk was the silliest thing in the world, and then I started to see this research that came out showing that it does actually help. In a recent study, they showed that more child-directed speech at between 11 to 14 months of age was linked to greater word production at the age of 2. So if an 11 to 14-month-old was receiving more of this child-directed speech, they had a larger vocabulary they could produce at 2 years of age. So it showed that they were learning from this. Just to give you a demonstration, child-directed speech is like, "Hey, look at the ball. Bounce, bounce, bounce. I'm bouncing the ball. You want to touch the ball?" I mean, anyways, it's just, I don't know. You're just slowing down. You're emphasizing the words. You tend to repeat certain words a lot, so that, you're using the simplest words you can think of. I don't know. So I think that was baby talk. Okay, it was. And you know what? We'll move on to our last slide. Anyway, so just to review for real quick here, we had some biological influences mentioned here. We have environmental influences. It matters how much we talk to our children, and it matters how we talk to them, using baby talk, for instance. Anyway, this last interactionist view just says, well, both are important. And I don't think anyone disputes this. Your experiences that you have influence your language acquisition. The environment makes a difference. But we also can't deny that language has strong biological foundations. You need certain brain areas and parts in order to produce language. If it was just biology, if only biology was important and your experiences didn't matter, then then people like that girl Jeannie, back in 1970, she was somebody that was discovered when she was I think 11 or so. She had been chained up in one room her whole childhood and hadn't been spoken to. Well, if only biology mattered, she should have been able to learn language after they found her at 11, but she couldn't. She could never properly learn language because she missed out on all that environmental input. She didn't hear language during her childhood, and so then she could never learn it properly. And so her biology should have been still the same. I mean, she still had Broca's areas and Wernicke's area, for instance. I mean, so that kind of things like that one, and that is also the boy of Aviron or something from the 1700s. He was like a wild boy, and they found in the forest. Anyways, people like Jeannie and this wild boy guy, if it was only biology, they should be able to learn language at any time. So you need environmental input. You need to hear language. If only hearing language, if only language experience was important, then my dogs should be able to have conversations with me. I mean, they've heard lots of human language. Obviously, they don't have the biology for it to all of a sudden speak to me. At least I kind of hope they don't start speaking to me. It'll kind of freak me out. But so you need both a human brain, the biology, and you need experience hearing language. And that is the interactionist viewpoint. And that will wrap up chapter 3.